we'll get going then. Good morning, Ray. And welcome to the Glendale City Council Budget Workshop session of February 2nd, 2021. The meeting is called to order. I will now conduct an attendance roll call. Please signify by saying present. Councilmember Aldama.
Present.
Councilmember Clark.
Here.
Councilmember Malnar.
Present.
Councilmember Tomacha.
Here.
Councilmember Turner.
Present.
I'm Vice Mayor Hugh. I'm here, and the mayor is excused. Kevin, we get right into to the presentation.
Fiscal year 21-22 budget workshop.
Well, good morning, Mayor, members, Vice Mayor, members of the council. Again, as always, we appreciate the extra time that you all individually invest through our budget process. We're really excited today about kicking off the discussion around the CIP. So I'd like to kind of back up first and talk about during my first 5 budget preparations, what's different this year than in past years. So typically the way we've done it, and if you recall last year, we presented around the mid part of March, we came to you with the first part of it looking at our general obligation, and then we looked at our enterprise funds, and we kind of broke it down into different sections. Some of the feedback the council provided was that they requested to see all of the CIP on the kind of the front end. And so what you saw then on the materials that were delivered to you earlier this week is kind of the entire first stab at a CIP, at a draft CIP. The second thing that the council provided feedback on was that if you recall, as we started having workshops on the CIP, as the council started reaching consensus on making changes to the proposed CIP, we would have to change out documents out of your book. And one of the feedback that we heard from council members was it got a little bit confusing of whether they're looking at the most current sheet of information or the old information. So today, a couple things are different. One, we're starting this process 6 weeks earlier than in past budget years. We've scheduled a number of additional CIP workshops to help assist the council in making sure that when you get to a budget time, that it's your CIP that you understand and approve. One of the things we're going to do today is that the team has put together a new tool that we'll be delivering to the council. And what this tool will allow you to do is it will have all of the CIP information broken down by fund, and it will show you what's in the, kind of just the proposed draft CIP. It then will allow you on your own to be able to move things, what we call above or below the funding line, because we have a fixed amount of resources that we can spend in the current year and in the out years on our budget. And so it would allow you to do to say, well, if I don't like this project and I want to put this in year 3, but I want to prioritize a project in year 2 and get it into year 1, this tool will allow you to move it up. It's a spreadsheet that allows you to move information up and below the line, so that then you can kind of work on your own in between workshops to start coming up with what will be ideas you think would be an improvement to the CIP plan. And then what we'll do is, as we start reaching consensus on decisions being made, staff will update that spreadsheet and send it to you with the more updated information. So it'll be just something we can electronically send to you, and then you can make changes. The changes you make on your spreadsheet won't affect what we're keeping here. So it allows you really to play through a whole different set of scenarios going forward. So we think this is going to be a really effective tool for you to start understanding, because what we want to do is keep out of going red. The minute you start moving too many projects proposed in the CIP and we start seeing a red number develop below, that's telling you we don't have identified either cash or bonding authority to be able to do that. So again, we're excited. Vicki Lissette and Amy have put a lot of effort into really trying to redo how we put our budget process together. A couple things we probably should have done. One, when we sent you the entire information this past Friday, we failed to tell you that what we're going to look at today are just 4 areas of that because we have other workshops planned. So today we'll be focusing on public safety, transportation, flood control, and libraries. The next workshop, we'll get into the other elements that's there, so we'll kind of move you through that. So then the final thing is that what we want to do too is give you, we will provide you this week with a complete list of all of the CIP changes of what staff has recommended that's different than in the CIP from last year. For today, all four of the people that represent their divisions can kind of walk you through what they have proposed differently in the CIP, and you can ask them questions, but we'll provide you with an actual written list as well, so you'll have that this week as well. And so with that, I'd like to turn it over to our Assistant City Manager, Vicky Rios, and also obviously Lizette Camacho, and Amy Lindsay will be here to assist.
Okay, Councilman Tomachoff had a comment?
I do. Gosh, I really wish I would have known what we were going to be going over today. I'm honestly stunned that you guys did that to us, that you give us this whole book, and then it's like, well, there's only 4 things we're going to need to deal with today. I mean, I spent my weekend, I feel like, being a private detective, trying to figure out what happened to projects, where the money came from, where it's going. We shouldn't have to be a private detective to try to figure this out. I mean, I'm looking at, just for example, Thunderbird Park. Last year, there's no money in any year except for 2026 through 2030, $11,629, $11,629,000. That now this year it's $1 million in 2023, little over $3 million in 2024, for a total of $4 million, $7.6 million. I don't know where that went. There's literally no, I don't even know how we're supposed to, I just really disappointed that we didn't have all the information and that we're trying to figure out what's going on here. I feel completely unprepared, and I don't like feeling unprepared.
Vice Mayor, Councilmember Tomachoff, again, as I said, we are doing an entirely rewrite of how we do the CIP. We'll take notes in this. We've already discussed this internally. It was our error. We apologize for that. That wasn't our intent, was to have you feel like we would address the entire CIP in one meeting. We had notified the council that we had scheduled 4 CIP workshops, but we just didn't, we should have broken it down, tell you what the 4 are. Today, what we can do is focus on those 4 areas. We will have our directors here that'll be able to answer questions for you, what's in there. And then, again, we'll make sure that, that we communicate a little bit better. Again, our apologies, that wasn't our intent. What we're trying to do, and the team has worked incredibly hard, is to take feedback from the council and try to get better at what we do. And so this is an entirely new effort, especially giving you a tool to be able to move things around and to see what the implications are. But clearly, we can do better, and we'll work towards doing that.
Vice Mayor.
Councilmember Turner?
Thank you. I'd like to echo the comments of my other council member, but also just to add to it, we all appreciate the hard work our staff does, especially, well, on everything, but we know that budget's a really concentrated effort that y'all go through. And I'll say this not only to budget staff, but, and I'm sure to some degree you do, but always try and, stop for a minute and go, if I was a council member, what would I need to know to be able to make the best decision here? Put yourselves in our shoes, and that I think will help to bring forward the communication that needs to happen. I've heard from others that they're a little startled about the program today, but just do that for us if you would. Thank you. Thank you, Vice Mayor.
Okay, thank you.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Phelps. Thank you, Council. Next slide, please, Lisette. So as Mr. Phelps kind of alluded to, our presentation today, we're going to give you first a kind of an overview of the CIP. It's material that most of this council, or if not all of you, have seen before, but for the public's benefit, we go back through it every year just to remind everyone what is a capital improvement plan. And then today we're going to specifically focus on general obligation bonds for streets, flood control, library, and public safety. And so the format of each section as we go through it will be to show you what projects we have that council has already seen that were in last year's adopted CIP that we have enough bonding authority to complete. And then after that, we'll show you, as you go through, what projects staff has prioritized and put forward on the basis of studies and other materials that council's also aware of, that we would recommend going forward with, but that we don't have enough bonding authority for. That's to give you an idea of when you might need to do a bond election again. And then we'll, as I said, or as Kevin said, the staff will be prepared to answer all of your questions. If there are questions that we can't answer today, we'll certainly take note of them and be prepared to answer them either during the week or by the next meeting. And then we're going to bring up the infamous, as we used to call it, the yellow worksheet that you've seen before. As Kevin said, this worksheet kind of shows you, in particular related to general obligation bonds, what, where you have authority, how much capacity you have to issue debt, and where you do and do not have enough authority. Again, it's a tool, as Mr. Phelps mentioned, that we're going to send you so you can also play with it and see in any given year, if you push a project forward or back, how it impacts your capacity to issue debt, which means your ability to pay off the debt, and what voter authorization you have. So that's kind of the format of today's presentation. And with that, I'll turn it over to Amy. She's going to start the first part.
Vice Mayor, question.
Councilmember Clark?
Yes, remaining on that slide, under geo streets, what is the current capacity? And in the proposal that we will be presenting from staff today, is all of that capacity expended in the presentation that you will be making this morning? And the same question goes for flood control, library, and public safety.
Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of the council, if you'll allow us a little bit of grace to get to that, you'll see that right away as we go through this presentation.
Okay.
Thank you, Ms. Rios. As Kevin and Vicki both mentioned earlier, we have the CIP budget workshops broken down into areas within the capital improvement plan. As you can see on the calendar in front of you, today's presentation is going to cover streets, flood control, libraries, and public safety general obligation bond-funded CIP projects. The workshop on February 16th will cover additional GEO bond-funded CIP projects in parks, open space, cultural facilities, and general government. The March 2nd workshop, we will cover pay-as-you-go, transportation sales tax, HERF, development impact fees, and grants. And the workshop on March 16th, we will discuss enterprise-funded CIP projects and then present the draft CIP to council.
Vice Mayor, question.
Go ahead.
What is the drop dead date that council would have to settle on what the final CIP would look like? Is it March 2nd, 19th, or 30th?
Vice Mayor, members of the council, there isn't, the drop dead date for making changes would really be the final adoption of the budget. Ideally, however, we would be through by April 20th so that we'd be, have a draft CIP and have all of that information ready for the schedules to be published for the tentative adoption of the budget in May. So we have a lot of time. We've scheduled these workshops up front to get done because we also have the operating budget to do. But in terms of a drop dead date, we have all the way until we, frankly, until we pass the final budget. You can make changes as long as the budget doesn't go higher than what you adopted at tentative.
Follow-up question. In terms of practicality, though, I would imagine that we will conclude with items within the CIP by the end of March. because I know the April meetings are about the operating budget. So would it be fair? I'm just trying to figure out, as you present information to us and as we discuss this, when we would be comfortable in finalizing just the CIP portion of the budget, of the proposed budget.
Vice Mayor, members of the council, again, per this schedule, ideally, we would be done around March the 30th. However, that's not a drop-dead date. We still have time after that. In fact, we could be discussing still CIP at those budget workshops that are now designated for operating budgets. But we want to give council the time that they need. So we've put together this outline. If we need additional workshops or we need additional time, it can be added as long as we're ready by tentative adoption of the budget.
Thank you.
I did want to just tell you one more thing while we're on the calendar. It's just a little bit of information about the CIP in general. The reason why we go through these categories and the way that we do, and you'll see GO bonds, and then you see the, pay-as-you-go transportation sales tax, HERF, and we break it down in this way is because for the CIP to balance and us to find the funding for these projects, each one of these balances independently. So in other words, the amount of funding that we have for GO bonds balances, we have to balance that, and then we have to balance for HERF, and then we have to balance for transportation sales tax. So you'll see as we go through, we've kind of laid that out for you. But I did want to just mention it again up front that in terms of trying to develop the CIP, each of these, we balance everything together, but each of these individual funding sources has to balance in. And I'm going to turn it back over to.
One second, Councilmember Turner.
Just a quick, easy one. Could you see that each of us get a copy of that slide? It has the detail for us on what the topics are for the upcoming
Yes,
meeting.
sir, absolutely. We did revise the slide. We'll make sure you have a copy of it.
Elements of a capital improvement plan, they're usually assets valued over $50,000 and have a useful life of 5 years or more. Typically, they're buildings, street improvements, water treatment plants, large equipment, land purchases, things of that nature. The city has a 10-year capital improvement plan, but the first year, so fiscal year 21-22, is the only portion of the CIP that is actually appropriated. And the projects that are in years 1 through 5 typically have identified funding sources. The city's financial policy is to improve existing assets, replace existing assets as needed, and then construct new assets. These are funding sources within the capital improvement plan. Enterprise funds are typically debt services paid from water or sewer fee revenue, and can also come from bonds, revenue obligations, or cash financing. A landfill is paid by user fees as well as solid waste. General obligation bonds, which is what we're discussing today, is debt issued. The debt issued has to be authorized by the voters. Streets, public safety, parks, government facilities, open space and trails, libraries, and flood control. And the debt service is paid by secondary property tax. Pay-as-you-go projects are cash funded. Transportation sales tax is the half-cent sales tax that the city has, and it is used to improve service of all modes of transportation. Highway user revenue funds is a restricted special revenue fund that can be for right-of-way acquisition, reconstruction, construction, repair, and maintenance. Development impact fees are one-time charges to developers for new development and must be used on new or expanded infrastructure. And grants are typically federal or state funded and often require a match contribution for the project. And with that, I'll turn it over to Ms. Camacho.
Good morning, Vice Mayor, members of the council. As Mr. Phelps said, this is the first time we provided a draft CIP before, at the beginning of our CIP budget workshops. The CIP binders you have in front of you don't include the carryover for projects that will not be completed at the end of the fiscal year 2021. The carryovers will be added to the CIP projects in April before the final budget workshop. Throughout this presentation, you'll hear us.
Vice Mayor, question.
Councilmember Clark?
Might I make a suggestion with regard to carryover? I know that you're waiting till April to add carryover because you'll have a better number. But I would appreciate it if I could get a draft initial number, realizing that between now and April, that number may diminish. And I think that would be helpful to know. Thank you.
Vice Mayor, Councilmember Clark, members of the council, we can certainly do that. Throughout the presentation, you'll hear us use two terms, capacity and authorization. The capacity is what we refer to as the amount of debt we can issue while keeping the levy flat. So it's essentially the ability to pay off the debt without raising the secondary property tax. Authorization or voter authorization are the authorization that the voters have approved in previous elections to issue debt. As far as the layout of the presentations, what you'll see us go through is that we've broken out the projects by three categories. The first one are projects that council have already seen and have been approved through the fiscal year 2021 adopted CIP. The other two categories are staff recommendations that are based on studies and assessments like the Pavement Condition Index, Public Safety Facility Condition Assessment that was presented to City Council back in December of 2019. The recommendations are also based on what we've heard as council priorities in previous council meetings and department meetings with the City Council.
Councilmember Aldama?
Thank you, Vice Mayor. I don't want to take you too far back, but with regard to the question that Councilmember Clark had on the fiscal 21 carryover, I just want to be clear for those who are watching, but even for myself, those are carryover funds from projects that either weren't completed or even started, is that correct?
Vice Mayor, Councilmember Aldama, members of the council, there are projects that either have started during the fiscal year that will not be completed at the end of the fiscal year, so they have remaining funding that will need to be carried over to the next fiscal year.
To complete those projects?
Vice Mayor, Councilmember Aldama, members of the council, yes, that is correct.
Okay, thank you so much for the clarification. And then with the information that Councilmember Clark asked for, in that information would be why the project didn't finish? I'm sure there's some really good reasons why they didn't get completed or even started. Would you have that information in there?
Vice Mayor, Councilmember Aldama, members of the council, we can certainly work with the departments to gather that information.
I think that'd be very helpful. Thank you so much. Thank you, Vice Mayor.
Welcome. Councilmember Tomachoff?
Thank you. I'm a little confused, though, because, for example, Ballpark Boulevard, my favorite topic, showed in last year's CIP $1,257,600 in fiscal year 2021. It's not, we don't even have carryover information, and now it's showing fiscal year 2022, that exact same dollar amount. So is that not a carryover? Or it should have been spent in already.
Mayor, members of the council, if I might, we're going to get through here in a minute and bring up streets, and when we get there, we'll have Mr. Ebersol come up, and he can probably answer that question.
I'm trying to understand, Vice Mayor, if I could, the carryover scenario, though, because you just said that it's not projects that have not begun.
Mayor,
It's projects
Vice
that
Mayor,
are underway
excuse
that would
me.
be carryover, but this is, I mean, I'm just curious, so I just want to understand what is and is not carryover. I'm just
Mayor,
using that
members
for an
of the council,
example.
there is no carryover, so if you see funding in a year, it's new funding.
Mayor, if I could, so there was 1.2 million in 2021 and another 1.2 million in 2022 that wasn't in last year's CIP?
Vice Mayor, Councilmember Tolmachoff, members of the council, Mr. Ebersol is here to answer that question.
Vice Mayor and members of the council, this is a two-part project. So we're having to coordinate with the Bureau of Reclamation on this project. So it is, you can view it as a carryover amount. It's the same project. It just was reallocated to the next year because we're in a substantial delay with the Bureau of Reclamation and other entities to get the project moving. So the funding was just moved to the next year.
Okay, so I'm completely confused now because that would seem to be a carryover. So I'm just using that as an example because I want to understand what is and is not a carryover. So, I mean, based on what you're telling us, it shouldn't even be showing here until you bring us the carryover information in April.
So, Mayor, members of the council, we haven't had an opportunity to go and look at carryover. In the example that Mr. Ebersol just described, sort of unbeknownst to budget at this point in time because they haven't done the carryovers yet, what you will see for that project is no spending and or very little spending and no carryover, and then the money is being pushed out into another period of time. So once we have the carryover, it'll be effectively whatever, it will zero out the carryover and move the funding back out. So that's a very unusual case where you have the department saying, well, we're not going to do this until later, and so they pushed it out, and so the carryover on that project is likely to be zero because we have it new in a new year. But Budget and Finance hasn't had the opportunity to work with the departments to look at carryover. Carryover is typically, again, a project that has been started, they've spent some of it, and we need to carry over the rest into a new year. What we're hearing from Mr. Ebersol is instead the department pushed it out into an additional period.
Mayor, just so for the time being, anything that would be considered carryover is showing as a fiscal year 2022? Just in this case? I'm still not clear what.
Mayor, members of the council, again, I think this is an exception to the rule, and we were not aware of that until just now when Mr. Ebersol said that. So, and we haven't looked at all the carryover. The carryover is not in there yet, and so in general, with this possible exception, if you see funding there, it's new funding in '22.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, go ahead.
This slide is the chart of the draft 10-year CIP by funding source. As you can see, the largest component is the enterprise funds at $469 million. The next largest category is the GO bonds at $364 million. And the third largest category is transportation sales tax at about $116 million. As you can see, the draft CIP is very large at about $1.2 billion. And what we've done for this presentation is we've broken out the projects by funding sources. And for today's presentation, we'll be covering general obligation bonds. And as Ms. Rio stated, we've further broken down general obligation bonds by the various voter authorization. So for today, we will be discussing streets, flood control, library, and public safety. In the next meeting, in February 16th, we will be reviewing geo-bonded CIP projects for parks, open spaces, cultural facility, and government facilities. As you saw in the calendar, we also have 3 budget workshops in March. On March 2nd, we will review pay-as-you-go, transportation, HERF, development impact fees, and grants. And on March 16, we'll do the enterprise funds, landfill, solid waste, and water, wastewater. March 30th, we'll do the follow-up to CIP and also have the updated draft CIP for council consideration. This slide is the chart on the remaining voter authorization by categories. The landfill, the first one on this list, and the water and sewer, the bonds that will be issued by the 2 enterprise funds will be paid for by user fees within those enterprise funds. The first column that you're seeing is the current remaining GO bond voter authorization by category. We do have a plan to issue GO Series 2021 in March of this year. The ordinance will be moving forward for council consideration at the February 23rd voting meeting. The very last column is the remaining GO
Vice
bond
Mayor.
voter
Councilmember Clark,
authorization.
just 1 second.
Thank you. Would you explain what it is exactly in February you're going to be asking us to do?
Vice Mayor, Councilmember Clark, members of the council, on February, the ordinance to approve the issuance of the new GO bonds, new money, for cultural facility, public safety, streets and parking, open space, parks and recreation, and flood control projects will be moving forward for council approval.
Is that based upon the last year's approved CIP?
Mayor, Vice Mayor, Councilmember Clark, members of the council, yes, it is based on the fiscal year 21 CIP. And you'll see the projects in the yellow worksheet too, so you'll be able to see which projects they are.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Tomachoff?
Thank you. What kind of projects are eligible under economic development?
So what we've done before with economic development are the projects for the streets and parking around the 101 where the IKEA was supposed to be located at, so those types of projects. So it's something that would spur on economic development.
And just to add to that, Vice Mayor, members of the council, we can get you the specific ballot language for that. We don't have that today, but if you'd like to see that, we can give you the specific ballot language that was passed for economic development.
To have it, because I'm wondering whether that would be a way to address the amphitheater, whether that would qualify as a way to fund that. Thank you.
The next several slides will go through the streets GO bond funded CIP projects. There are two types of street projects, non-capital street maintenance and also the arterial reconstruction program. What you're seeing on this slide are the non-capital street maintenance, which we also refer to as the pavement management plan. The maintenance or repairs usually last 5 to 7 years, and they're not eligible for bond funding. All roadways in the city are included in the program, and usually the work that's done is less invasive than the street reconstruction. It does require coordination with residents, parking, and utilities, and some examples of non-capital street maintenance are crack and fog sealing, slurry seal, fractured aggregate surface treatment or FAST, and mill and overlay. The next slide is the focus of the presentation today for GO Bond Funded Streets Project. It's the Arterial Reconstruction Program. The ARP is usually the life of the street, typically lasts 25 or more years. They are eligible for bond funding, and the projects will enhance traffic capacity and safety. We also add some American with Disabilities Act ramps brought through current standards, and it does also require coordination with business access, traffic flow, other cities and departments, and utilities. And when the projects are completed, usually the repairs and maintenance, they are moved into for the pavement management program. This slide refers to the council workshop back in June 23rd, 2022. If you recall, at that workshop, I meant 2020. If you recall, at that workshop, City Council had consensus to move or change funding for 15 million of arterial reconstruction projects from transportation sales tax to general obligation bonds. The ARP are capital in nature, and they do qualify for bond funding, and in the next few slides, you'll see which projects are related to the 15 million that was moved from transportation sales tax to general obligation bonds.
Mayor?
Councilmember Turner?
How is the determination made as to whether or not a particular street treatment is eligible for the capital program for the GO bonding?
Vice Mayor, Councilmember Turner, members of the council, Mr. Ebersol will add to my answer if I don't cover it all. But for the most part, what they do is they look at the pavement condition index. They also coordinate with other utilities. And they've also taken into consideration completion of the projects in light of the mega events that are coming here at the city. So Super Bowl and other events.
So more specifically, thank you for that, Ms. Camacho, but Vice Mayor, my question is more, on this one slide back, I'm looking at other examples of non-capital street maintenance. But if our capital program is defined as projects that are over $50,000 and last longer than 5 years, certainly things like mill and overlay and these surface treatments would fall into that category. So I'll just need a little clarification, please. How is it
Mayor,
determined?
excuse me, Vice Mayor, members of the council, for a project to be eligible for bond funding, we ask that the life of the project be more than the life of the project be equal to or less than or more than the life of the bond. So in other words, if the treatment to the road is going to extend its useful life for another 25 years, then we will issue bonds for 25 years or 20 years. If it's a 5-year extension and we're going to have to do it again in 5 to 10 years, we typically do not issue bonds for those because you would be paying off bonds over 25 years for something that only lasted 5 to 10 years. Does that answer your question?
Yes, Ms. Rios, it does. It's kind of like putting your washing machine in on your home mortgage.
Exactly.
You're going to be paying for the machine. But still, I would say that perhaps mill and overlay might be a treatment that could be considered longer term.
Go ahead.
Yes, Mayor, council member, I've worked with finance and GASB, General Accounting Standards from the feds, with reference to how you define a reconstruction such as bondable. And we've many times tried to insert mill and overlay and have not been able to do that. There's a gray area when you start dealing with the base. Once you get into the base of the reconstruction, there's a general determination on if you do enough of that base, it's a reconstruction. But I can tell you that the pendulum moves through the years with reference to GASB and how they take a look at that. But I've never been able to bond a typical mill and overlay.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Tomanchai.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. So is that basically an internal policy that we have, a best practice? I just want to understand the rationale for that.
Yeah, Mayor, Councilmember Tomanchai, that is not an internal policy at all. Again, the oversight, and Vicki can talk more about our bond counsel advising us, but it's clearly, and it goes city by city throughout the country when we talk about these treatments. It'd be a wonderful thing to do to try to get mill and overlays into that system because they're so expensive and it's usually cash and carry, but it's been pretty near impossible to do that. And Vicki might want to add to that with reference to what the regulations are.
Yes, Vice Mayor, members of the council, it is considered to be a best practice, and it is also, see how to put this, it is also difficult to sell to potential bond buyers that you are in the habit of financing with long-term bonds, maintenance type of projects. So when you go out to sell the bonds, you list out all of the projects that you're going to do, and if the potential bond holders don't agree with that and what you're doing with the bonds, then your bonds will not be sold. So it's both a best practice, and as Mr. Friedline alluded to, it's part of our generally accepted accounting principles that are put out by GASB, and in addition to that, it is just a best practice.
Go ahead.
The projects you see on this slide have been previously approved by the City Council as the fiscal year 21 CIP was adopted. The streets projects begin on page 155 of your binder, so it does have a tab. We don't have any individual slides for each of the streets projects because the project description are going to be very similar for each of the intersection in which the project is to construct or reconstruct a segment of streets. So with that, I'll pause here to see if council has any questions on the specific projects on this slide.
Any questions?
Vice Mayor, I have one.
Okay, go ahead.
You referred us to page 155 within the CIP binders that we were given on Friday afternoon. Are all of these projects that are listed, and there are a considerable number of them, under GEO funding, or are they various funding sources?
Vice Mayor, Councilmember Clark, members of the council, they're under GEO bond funding.
Okay, so,
If I could clarify, I'm sorry. Let me make sure, Vice Mayor, excuse me, Councilmember Clark. Can you repeat your question, please?
yes, you gave us a binder
Yes.
Friday afternoon with, and it starts on, streets projects start on page 155, and there are a lot of projects listed. It looks like you've gone to a new system and you're pulling out and identifying individual streets for either arterial work or reconstruction. Now, my question is, and maybe it's answered by summary by funding source, but are all of these projects under the GO funding source, or are part of them funded under transportation sales tax or HERF or whatever?
Vice Mayor, Councilmember Clark, members of the council, the projects have other funding sources. So if you flip on page 159, it is the summary by funding source. So you
Which
can
I'm just
see
looking at, yeah.
the various funding sources that are funding the projects. And I will do an example for you. So if you look at page,
Before, let's just look at page 159. You list all the funding sources except GO, general obligation. I see highway user, transportation sales tax, streets construction, HERF capital, transportation capital, diff. Where's the GO funding that we're going to be talking about this morning?
Vice Mayor, Councilmember Clark, members of the council, the GEO bond funded projects are the streets construction projects.
So that would be 4010.
4010, yes, you are correct.
Okay, thank you.
And on the following page, on page 160, the pavement management is a good example of a project. You can see that it's funded by multiple funding sources. You see that the construct category or construction category, the funding source is Fund 2050 or Highway User Gas Tax, so it's HERF. And then a portion of that is 2070, which is the transportation sales tax. So all of the projects will have the same information. The funding source column will tell you which funding source the project is using.
If I may add to that, Vice Mayor. So if you look at the next, we'll look at page 161 as another example. That project is the one Councilmember Tomelchoff referred to a little bit earlier that is funded with streets development impact fees. And so because today we're talking about general obligation bonds, we're not covering that project today. That project will be covered. We're certainly able to answer some questions about if you have them, but the way we have this broken out, it'll be covered when we cover development impact fees, if that kind of helps everyone understand the methodology that we're using to go through these projects.
Vice Mayor, I guess it's a difference between apples and oranges. I understand your rationale for just reviewing GO projects, but when a program such as streets has different authorization funding sources, it might also, at least for me, it was helpful to go through all of the streets projects regardless of funding source. And I don't know how you split the baby and solve that, but I think to divvy up streets between transportation, sales tax, and HERF and GO kind of makes it schizophrenic, at least for me. Thank you.
The next three,
Vice
done?
Mayor, let me
No.
continue. For example, and this is where my confusion arises. I'll just give you an example. When we get to page 165, which is street reconstruction, Bethany Home Road, 43rd to 51st, I believe that's a GO-funded project, although it doesn't say on the page. It just describes the project and gives it a number. Yeah,
Excuse me.
4010, it comes from Fund 4010, but most people wouldn't know that. Okay, so this is a GO-funded project, and it's legitimate to review it and ask questions about it today. But there might be another project in here that's also a streets project that's not funded by 4010, and we would not be discussing it, or, for example, 67th Avenue bike lanes is 4030, comes from Transportation Capital. So we would not be asking any questions about 67th Avenue bike lanes today, is that correct?
Vice Mayor, members of the council, you're certainly able to ask whatever questions you have. We have the department directors here to answer those questions. I did want to clarify also, when we talk about GO funding, that's an acronym that we use for transportation sales tax funding. So we try to distinguish GO funding from GO bond funding. So I just want to be a little bit cautious about that because they are very similar, and I make that mistake myself on occasion. The slide presentation that we have today is focused on GO bond funding. The yellow worksheet that we're going to bring up for council to kind of see where we are is all based on GO bond funding. Each of these funding sources has to be balanced separately. Now, behind the scenes, staff is also balancing in total. And so for an example for that, let me just say, and I don't have a specific project in front of me, but if a project has multiple funding sources and one of them is general obligation bonds, but another is, we'll say, for example, development impact fees, and council wants to move the GO bond funding portion of that project forward, behind the scenes, staff will have to go back and see, okay, can we balance that diff portion of the same project within our capital? So it is very complex and complicated. We've tried to break it down in this way because we have to, as a city, balance this general obligation bond program with those things in mind, that if a project has multiple funding sources, we're going to have to go back and see the other funding sources that go with it. Can they also be moved forward or pushed back?
Which raises an interesting follow-up question. Say hypothetically you wanted to move a project out of GO funding and assign it to transportation sales tax funding, for example. Is that possible?
Vice Mayor, members of the council, it may be possible, but because that would be very complicated, you'd have to ask us and say, well, this is what we would like to do, and then we'd have to go back to another model that we have for transportation sales tax and see if that's affordable within that model. So the answer is you can, but we would need to know that that's what you want to do, and then we can go to give you an answer later. We can't answer that question on the fly at the workshop.
Okay, one more follow-up based upon what you just said. So is your criteria to make a project eligible to be moved from one funding source to another that there is authorization or capacity left within that fund, or, and that's the reason for your approval or denial, or recommendation of approval or denial of moving a project from one funding source to another? What is your criteria for consideration of moving a project from, say, Go funding to transportation sales tax?
Vice Mayor, members of the council, there would be a couple of things that we would need to look at. The first is that a project that is eligible for that funding source? So in other words, if we, I'm not suggesting that council would do this, but if we had a park project, we couldn't move it into streets transportation sales tax. So the first thing is it an eligible project for those restricted type of funding source? And then the second is it affordable within the funding that we have in that, for that source? So those are the two things we would be looking at.
But it could be affordable, for example, if a project, say, within transportation sales tax, were moved back a year or two. That would free up capacity for that current year, and then that project becomes affordable within transportation sales tax funding, if it were eligible.
Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of the council, that's correct, but that's part of the reason why we would have to take it back from council with some type of consensus to look at that, and then we would go back into different financial models that we have and see if we can, let's just say you wanted to do it next year and you wanted to move it there. And if we couldn't fund it next year because of competing priorities, we'd have to come back to council and say, well, yes, we can fund it, but only if we could push it out a year. So we would be doing that work kind of behind the scenes.
And you would bring that information to us?
Mayor, members of the council, correct.
Thank you. Thank you, Vice Mayor.
Councilmember Tomacha.
Thank you. Just want to understand, we referred to page 161. So how, and this is kind of along the same line of questioning, how is it determined which projects are going to be, which diff fees are going to be used for which projects? I don't recall, rarely anyway, being any part of those conversations. So, how is it determined that diff fees and what diff fees are being used for example, this Ballpark Boulevard connectivity, whatever that is?
Vice Mayor, members of the council, these projects and the way you're seeing them now are staff recommendations. And again, there are a couple things that we would look at. The first we would look at is the project diff eligible? Is it considered expansion and growth-related project? Is it in the right area? As you can see here, these are streets diff east, and so we have to look at what zone is it in, and is it within the zone that diff was collected? And then finally, we would have to look at how much diff we either currently have or have projected that could fund that particular project. And then we would make this recommendation to council that we fund this project via diff because it's eligible for the type of project, it's in the right area, and we have what we believe to be the funding available.
So how does the council know what type of diff fees are even available for what projects? We don't have that information.
Mayor, members of the council.
This is a recommendation from staff because you know what diff fees are available for what type of projects, but we don't know that.
Mayor, members of the council, we can certainly provide that information. We do a diff report that is available at the end of every fiscal year. So we have one for the end of June 30th of 2020, but we can update that and get it out to you if you'd like.
Thank you.
Vice Mayor?
I have one more if I could, Vice Mayor. And the other thing, I'm not sure what the grand total amount is at Ballpark Boulevard, but I know as a result of Ballpark Boulevard that we asked to have a policy adopted, and I don't believe we ever came back to us that if a project exceeded 10%, it's 10% contingency, that it needed to be brought back to council at a workshop for an explanation and approval to move forward. So I don't know, I'm guessing that Ballpark Boulevard is surpassed its 10% contingency a long time ago. And we never adopted that policy. I would like to have that happen. I remember there was a consensus to do that. Not saying that the council wouldn't approve moving forward with projects, but, Ballpark Boulevard started out at $6 million. I think it's somewhere around 13, 14 million. It might even be more than that now. But so that we can have an understanding of what's happening, why it's costing more, all of that, if it exceeds the 10% contingency that was part of the initial approval, it come back in a workshop to present what issues it's, are coming up and causing it to increase the cost and get a approval to move forward beyond the contingency with the council. So I don't believe that's happened with Ballpark Boulevard, and I am just curious about that.
Councilman Raldama?
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Yeah, I want to echo the comments of Councilmember Tomanchov with regard to DIF funds. But question, didn't the legislature change how we can use DIF funds so we can use them outside of its development? So with that said, yes, we absolutely need to have a separated, not necessarily a workshop, but pamphlet that speaks to where the money come from, where's it going, and yeah, council should have their hands in that. I can appreciate our staff bringing some recommendations, but the council member is absolutely correct, and I echo those statements that we need to really be involved in the DIF funds, where they're going, what we're going to do with them, where they come from. So I just want to echo those comments. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
The next 3 slides are staff recommendations, again, based on the pavement condition index, coordination with other utilities, and what we've heard from council as council priorities. The projects you're seeing on this slide are the $15 million that council had consensus back in June to move from transportation sales tax to general obligation bond funding. By approving this listing of projects, the full $15 million, it will use up all of the authorization in transportation or streets. The next 2 slides are staff recommended projects. Again, approval of these projects will require additional voter authorization through a bond election. I did want to point out the very last thing on this list, that's the Scallop Street program. Scallop streets are either missing a full width of pavement, curb and gutter, sidewalk in one or both sides. They are typically the result of county islands being annexed, undeveloped, or properties with anticipated development. And this slide is the last slide on the staff recommended street projects that will require additional voter authorization. I'll pause here to see if council has any specific questions on any of the projects.
Any questions? Oh, go
Vice
ahead.
Mayor, yeah, not necessarily projects, but I just wanted to confirm the amount of revenue generated by our GO tax, our half-cent sales tax. I think based on some other, I went through all the minutes from last year's budget meetings, and I think we were told when we discussed the 7/10 sales tax that every 0.1% is $6 million. So does the half cent generate about 30 million a year? I just wanted to understand what that dollar amount was.
Vice Mayor, members of the council, if you'll give us just a minute, we'll get you that figure.
Thank you.
So with that, I'll turn it over to the yellow worksheet. I'll pull it up on the screen here. And
Have it? Do we not have the yellow worksheet?
Mayor, members of the council, you do not. That's something that we're going to send you here during this week.
But you're pulling it up right now?
That's correct. It's an interactive worksheet. It reflects the same information that was given to you in these slides. But in this case, because it's interactive, if you want us to show you what the impact would be of moving a project or something like that, we can show you. And as Mr. Phelps alluded to, we'll send this out, and then you can also move projects around and kind of, for lack of a better description, play with it, develop different scenarios on your own if you'd like.
Aldama?
Yeah, while staff is doing that, Councilmember Tomachov brought up something that I brought up last year and the year previous. There was no conversation about it. I talked about, and I think Councilmember Clark also talked about, and Ms. Rios does have the dollar amounts. What would it take to start reducing the sales tax incrementally? Ms. Rios brought that information. We also talked about reducing the food tax. Ms. Rios has that information. We don't have those robust conversations. We're currently in a pandemic, so I would be very supportive in looking at reducing our food tax. That's what people need the most right now. And so we haven't had those robust conversations. So I will ask again that we need to look at that. We need to look at it every single year and have that robust conversation. But even more so, we need to look at it this budget session. So I'm asking, while we're pausing here, that we put that into our budget. I'm asking the city manager to look at both of those. And Ms. Rios has those numbers, and I'm sure they'll change from last year. Thank you.
Mr. Vice Mayor,
Yes.
Councilmember Aldama, I mean, it doesn't take anything. It's a policy issue of the council. If you say we want to reduce our sales tax by this amount, we can give you what the financial impact of that amount would be, and then we would probably have to go in and start identifying potential cuts within our programs so that you can balance that out. Our 5-year forecast that we present to the council assumes the existing level of taxation, and the rates are assumed in our 5-year model. If we make a change that, then it obviously adjusts out all those revenues, and then that affects our operating budget and how we would go forward. So we can certainly have that discussion, but really what we could do is if the council wants to see what the impact would be, then what we can do, it either as a council item of special interest or just as part of the process, we can say, if we reduce food tax by this much, here's how much general fund is impacted by. And then as we then develop our operating budget, we're going to have to make assumptions of reducing programs, perhaps FTEs, other areas, and we'd work with the council on where to prioritize those cuts at. Or I think the other option would be, and I think you do mention that, we are in a pandemic, what you could do is as an example, council could do a temporary reduction of the sales tax and use your reserves as the way to backfill that, knowing that once things normalize back into the economy, that the sales tax gets restored. You could use, that's what a general fund reserve balance can be used for. So there's a couple different scenarios that are there. But whatever we do on reducing tax rates does have an impact then in terms of our budget adoption, our creation process.
Vice Mayor. Thank you, Vice Mayor. Yes, it was an item of interest of mine, but there was no conversation. What you just outlined is exactly what has to happen. This council, yes, is who instructs you to do it. We can simply say, cut the budget, and then you'll come back. But we have to have a robust conversation. We need to start having it now before you start to structure the budget excluding it. We need to see what the budget looks like with those cuts. Is it a 1% cut across the board for every department? Where is the money going to come from that's going to make it up? You're absolutely right. Take away here, add here. I get it. It's a teeter-totter there, but we haven't had that conversation. So I'm asking now, and if I have to ask it as an item of interest, we need to have the conversation every year. But we are at the top of our budget. I'm asking the council to consider looking at that and how do we keep it? I think it was $1 million. If it's $1 million, how do we trim $1 million? Both of those, food tax and sales tax. We owe it to our citizens to at least look at it, and they need to hear from us whether we decide to do it or not. Thank you. Thank you, Vice Mayor.
Councilmember Tomachov?
Thank you, Vice Mayor. I think, if I remember, does the food tax generate around 15 million a year, somewhere in that neighborhood? I agree that it's something we should look at. I don't know whether there would be a consensus to take any action on that, but it's something that we should be looking at every year, because whether or not we can even assess a food tax is not necessarily always going to be something that we have control over. That could be legislated away from us. So I think even if there's not a consensus for the council to do away with that, I don't know, where everybody's at with that. I think it's definitely something that we should have on our radar every year, because the legislature could take action to make that ability to have a food tax go away. So we need to be prepared, I think, for both scenarios, I think, on an annual basis. Thank you.
Mr. Vice Mayor?
Vice Mayor?
Well, let me hear from, go ahead, Councilmember Clark.
Well, I would contend that, and I support looking at this food tax, not the sales tax right now, but the food tax, because I think that's more doable. And it doesn't have to be all of it at once. It can be graduated over a period of years. But I also contend that our general fund budget continues to grow. And what a reduction in the food sales tax would do would be to diminish part of that growth. It doesn't necessarily, in my view, mean cuts so much as the growth would not be as large as we are accustomed to seeing or would like to see for the coming year. So as much as I appreciate saying that the first remedy is to look at cuts within the budget, I don't necessarily accept that as philosophy. Rather, I think that whatever diminishment of the food sales tax that occurs or does not occur could be absorbed by the growth we are experiencing within the budget. Thank you.
Go ahead, Kevin.
Mr. Vice Mayor, to Councilmember Aldama's point in some of the conversation, probably if we want to look at this every year, the appropriate place from a staff perspective to have this discussion is when we put together the 5-year forecast. It's very, what we have to do is once we understand what we believe will be the revenues to work with, we then work with our departments. And so this work is already well begun with each of our departments bringing forth their budget. So then to do it kind of halfway through the process, we can certainly still do that, but it's challenging because now you're really working on multiple approaches to a budget. So I think in future years, the best way to do is when we do the 5-year forecast is get consensus on the council as to what they want to see as the tax rate. And then let's say if it is the goal of the council to reduce a sales tax category or other revenue category, then we'll build that into our model, and then we can then come back and start working with, if it's a cut, as Councilmember Adama talked about, or if it's maybe not adopting a new priority the council has. I mean, we can kind of work with the council on that, because you're right. What we're, for example, in the budget coming up, we're working to not only handle the normal inflationary growth of just running government, but we're trying to, for example, make improvements to our park programming and our park maintenance. It just means maybe you have to reduce that down a little bit. Doesn't mean we're going to cut our spending in parks per se, but it may just mean we have to push out some of the priorities. But I think the best part, I think, for me would be, and we'll talk about this internally, is that when we come to you, which we did just recently with the 5-year forecast, it has assumptions on what those sales tax rates are. And I think that's the appropriate time to say, and that's, if you recall, we do that for the property tax. Once again, we got council consensus during our 5-year forecast that there was no plan to increase the property tax levy rate and to keep it flat. We could have the same discussion on sales tax and either, in a category, reduce it, increase it. You could do it on your go. I mean, we have a variety of different revenue sources.
Vice Mayor.
Councilman Aldama.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Kevin, thank you for that, Mr. Phelps. Someone mentioned, I think Councilmember Clark mentioned about our fund balance. Just so our citizens know, we've exceeded our 50 million. We've got a great looking fund balance right now. And I'm not saying take it all and use it to reduce the tax, but if we were to do a temporary or if we were to do a permanent one and use the fund balance that would only carry us so far. We would have to start looking at an operational budget. So it's not just one, it's both. We don't have a policy right now that says stop at 50 million or keep going. We're pretty fat on that fund balance, and we need to create a policy that says we need to add a certain percentage to our fund balance every year, and then that's it. No more of it. It needs to go somewhere else. A whole different policy change there, but we need to have the robust conversation within this count, and we need to start it for this budget year, not push it to next year. It's just really important subject right now. And thank you to the council members who are chiming in. Thank you, Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. I mean, we just literally had the 5-year forecast 3 weeks ago today, so I don't think we're so far down the road that nothing can be done. I think it's a conversation worth having. I think it's we need to be looking at the possibility. Really, I mean, there are very few cities that have a food tax, and we're one of the few. I know it generates a lot of revenue, but, you know, I believe we can exercise enough fiscal restraint in our planning to, you know, accommodate a reduction like that. There's a lot of people that are out of work, can't pay their rent, that have deferred rent. This is a long-term issue for a lot of our residents that are. So, I mean, I think that I believe that it's totally doable. I think we should look at it this year. And you brought up a good point, Mr. Phelps, about the parks. But I think that we should be able to accommodate, at least move forward in our goals with the, there should be a big cash infusion. I believe that we talked about taking that Glen Lakes money and contributing that towards increasing, you know, that was supposed to go towards parks. So there should be, I would hope, a big cash infusion in parks this year from the sale of Glen Lakes, which closed, I think, late last year. So I don't know whether that's how the budget's been planned, but that's what the discussion was when we were talking about selling Glen Lakes. Thank you.
Vice Mayor.
Vice,
Just to respond to Councilor Tomachoff. So what we've kind of talked with the council is take one-time dollars and put into capital, not into operating. And so when I was referencing priorities of the council, I specifically mentioned kind of the parks maintenance and operation, which is ongoing. So you're correct. You know, things like the sale of proceeds from different assets that we have, we've kind of talked with the council about putting those into one-time projects where we're doing 3 community centers right now as a result of the discussions we had this fall. I was just referencing that that the council also sometimes looks more from an operational and programming side, and that if you reduce down your sales tax authority, you'll just have to make decisions on where you want those cuts to go, and where you want to still maintain. It doesn't have to be an across-the-board cut. You could say we want all of the cut to, or most of the cut to come from this one category.
Vice Mayor.
Ma'am.
Okay. I believe that a discussion on food sales tax merits discussion this year, even if it is not implemented until next budget year. But that discussion should include the following. It should include how much new money has been generated as a result of growth. It should provide us with options. What is the impact of a 1% or maybe 0.5% reduction? It doesn't have to be a large amount each year. It could be incremental each year. I would like to see options. I would like to have that discussion now, even if the implementation does not occur until next budget year. Thank you.
Vice Mayor. I'll yield to Councilmember here. He hasn't spoken.
Thank you. On the topic of the sales tax on food, I am in agreement that we should have the discussion. It should be a yearly discussion. However, I just want to remind us that this is not a discussion. We're here to talk about CIP, and I think we need to get back on topic. I think staff gets it, that we want sales tax. We want them to come and talk about sales tax.
Food sales tax.
The food sales tax, correct. And I think that's appropriate, and I think we can have that discussion this year. But I would like us to get back on topic and get back to the CIP We're limited on time today, and I think we have a lot of things yet to discuss.
Vice Mayor,
One more,
thank you.
go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Vice Mayor, and Councilmember is correct. I sabotaged the meeting and took that opportunity because there was a pause. But my last comment is to the food tax, though, and we hopefully, and I'll call an item of interest so we can have a workshop on it, but groceries have increased significantly. Certain categories like milks, eggs, and meats have increased. So we can simply look at what the increase was and how much more sales tax we're gaining because of those increases, and that's what we can look at reducing. So Councilmember's correct, we need to get back on topic here, but whatever I have to do to make sure that we have that conversation, I think everybody's on board. Thank you, Vice Mayor.
All right, thank you. So we can get through a slide and give questions later. So let's move forward.
Before I move forward with the interactive yellow worksheet, to answer Councilmember Tolmachov's question on the transportation sales streets, flood 21, because those projects relate to the GEO Bond Series 2021 that we will be issuing this March. The focus of the presentation are projects for fiscal year 22 through 31, so it's for the 10-year CIP. And to the far right here, you'll see the total once council has prioritized and approved the projects. So under this section right here, total approved projects by fund, again, these are projects that City Council have seen before. They're projects that were approved in the fiscal year 2021 adopted CIP. So this is the top section. I'm going to scroll down to move into the middle part of the page. And this middle part of the page, which is highlighted in green right here, is the remaining voter authorization. So I'll use streets as an example right here. So you have the same authorization again. So before we issue the fiscal year 2021 GEO, streets has remaining authorization of about 25.5 million. We'll be issuing right here, these projects right here, the 7.725 million in new money for streets, and that does subtract that from the remaining voter authorization of 25.5 million. So for fiscal year 21, after we issue the new debt, the remaining balance in voter authorization is 17.7 million. I do want to point out that for parks, the red highlighted years over here, it shows that there aren't enough voter authorization, that there is a need to go back out to the voters for additional authorization through a bond election. You see the numbers are increasing, and that's due to the projects that are approved in fiscal year 23, 24, but I just want to point to the very last row right here. So it does show that for years 5 through 6, and in total, we need an additional 40.6 in voter authorization for parks. Then the very last section that's highlighted in blue right here are the available funding or the capacity to issue debt without raising the property tax levy. So keeping the secondary property tax levy flat. These section will, right here in the bottom, will also turn red as council approve projects, and we're exceeding the estimated funding or the capacity to issue debt here year by year. The estimated funding has been reviewed by our financial advisor, and it does take into consideration a flat levy. For fiscal year 2021 or series 2021 GO, we plan on issuing a total of about 16 million, and we do include the cost of issuance here. I will move on to the streets here, so then I can run you through the worksheet here. The streets, as you saw in the draft CIP, have several projects, or very many projects here. We have put in the projects in this worksheet. The highlighted projects here are the ones that council have previously approved in the adopted fiscal year 2021 CIP. So those projects are the Glendale Avenue 101 to El Mirage, Camelback Road 83rd Avenue to 91st Avenue, and Bell Road 51st Avenue to 59th Avenue. The 7 million I mentioned earlier that we'll be issuing this year for streets, if you add up the total here, it's that same 7.725 you saw in the summary. And you see that the fields here are in red text. That's because they've changed from last year in the previous yellow worksheet. If you recall, for streets, we had one lump sum. So the projects were not identified. It was street reconstruction. And what the department has done, and throughout the CIP, is that they've identified specific projects for council consideration. Because it is a draft CIP and we are looking for feedback from City Council and approval of the projects, you see that most of the projects in the draft CIP for streets have a no right here, meaning they have not been approved by City Council. This is when we could prioritize, reprioritize, move a project back as needed, depending on remaining voter authorization or the capacity to issue debt. So once a council approves this project, for example, the 101 to 91st Avenue, that project will be highlighted yellow also, indicating that council has approved it, and then just going through the remaining of the projects. If we are running out of voter authorization, the same green section here will turn red. In fiscal year 22, we have 7 million in remaining voter authorization. The same thing for the debt capacity. It will turn red here in the bottom if we're exceeding the capacity to issue debt while keeping the levy flat. So I'll pause there. It's a big spreadsheet, and I know it can be complex, so I'll wait to see if council has any questions or any feedback.
Vice Mayor,
Manager?
can you walk through and just give some examples of moving things around? And even though that's not necessarily we're talking about making that decision, but can you give examples of the council about the impact of moving something into a funded and how it affects capacity?
Mayor, members of the council, sure. So I'll start with this Glendale Avenue in 101 to 91st. What can happen is if council has consensus to approve this project, we can say yes to this. And you'll see that it's highlighted yellow. This 2 million right here, 2.9, and the 395,000 right here is now subtracted from the remaining voter authority that we have here. If you recall, this was 7 million, less the 2.9 million, it's now 4.1 million. And now it's showing that we're exceeding our capacity to issue debt while keeping the levy flat. So you show a negative 1.1 million in here. So that means that whether it's coming from flood control, library, or public safety, we need to reprioritize other projects so that we can be within our capacity to issue debt.
Are there other, Vice Mayor, members of the council, are there
question.
other projects you'd like us to show you an example of how this worksheet kind of works? Again, we're going to send this out, to you. One of the things that we, as a staff, have done here, and Ms. Camacho alluded to it, is in the prior version of the CIP, we had everything lumped together in a big category that said street reconstruction. That was the way, in some ways, that was the way that it went to the voters for the bond election, which obviously was not passed. And so the attempt here has been to break it down into specific projects with the thought that voters would be able to see in perhaps a future bond election more detail about what streets were going to be, would be completed under that bond program. So the reason these projects say no right now, as Ms. Camacho said, is because we would not have enough voter authority to do those projects. But if we mark them as yes, then what we're saying is, well, you could potentially fund them, but only if you were successful in getting voter authority again in probably in fiscal year, or excuse me, calendar year 2022 when we have the next general election.
Vice Mayor,
Go ahead.
I think this is complicated. I think it'll take council a while to become familiar with this and use it to its full potential. Thank you for providing it for us. and I'm sure later you will give us the link or send us the link so that we can access it ourselves. My immediate question is, when do we have the opportunity to talk about individual projects and ask questions about them?
So, Mayor, members of the council, you can ask those questions now. The department is here. We didn't do a separate slide for everyone because each of these projects that you've seen listed on the pages, they're basically the same. They're just a street reconstruction of that segment. So rather than, print multiple slides that all say street reconstruction of a segment, we just listed the projects. But Mr. Eversole is here to answer your questions about those
Great. I have a series of them. Vice Mayor, may I
Okay.
continue? Page 165, street reconstruction, Bethany Home Road, 43rd to 51st. I looked at last year's appropriation approved and what is proposed for this year under the CIP. And I want to understand what's going on and what the thinking was with regard to changes in some of these projects. This does not signal an approval or disapproval of any particular project. It's simply an attempt for me to better understand the thinking and what's going on. So, starting with page 165, in last year's CIP, in fiscal year 2023, there was an authorization of $1.818876 million. That has been reduced to $100,000. And the project, in essence, has been moved back a year to fiscal 2024 with an authorization that is larger than the original appropriation. Now it's at $2.732876. Can you explain that, Mr. Eversole, so that I understand why the reduction from 1.8 million to 100,000 and why the project is moved back a year and the amount increases by almost $1 million?
Okay, Vice Mayor and members of council, the project funding source changed from transfer tax to the general obligation bonds. The change in project allocation reflects the revised estimated costs. The Arterial Reconstruction Program was presented to council on June 23, 2020 for this.
Can I ask a follow-up? Why was it changed from temporary or from transportation sales tax to GO funding? Was that part of the direction that we gave back in the fall?
Vice Mayor and members of the council, yes, that was the, all these streets are part of the Arterial Reconstruction Program, and we presented the council to transfer over the $15 million of transportation cash to general obligation bonds.
Okay, why does the project increase by dropping it back a year? Why does the project increase by almost $1 million, 900,000? The cost of the project.
Vice Mayor and council, I don't have the detailed answer for that, other than we're more educated about what we need in coordination with our other departments, the utility companies, and the cost estimates that have been received.
Okay. Well, I would say you were way off in your estimate, and that is the only comment I will make. Page 167, street reconstruction, Camelback 83rd to 91st. The prior year's CIP, there was no authorization for fiscal year 2022. Now there is a new allocation of 1.2 million. Can you explain how that occurred?
Vice Mayor and council, this project had a portion of the budget allocated to transportation tax as well. The project funding source changed to the general obligation bonds. And this reflects the revised estimated cost.
Um, page 169. Central core sidewalk gaps. This project has been moved up, and I want to understand the philosophy about why it's been moved up. It was originally approved for fiscal year 2023 in the amount of $411,499, and fiscal year 2024 for $188,878. It has been moved up to a new allocation proposed in this year's budget for an allocation of $390,582. Question, why was it moved up? And is it of such a priority to move up that it reduces capacity perhaps for other projects? In other words, is it possible, if council were to identify other projects, that this project could be moved back to its original last year's approved CIP designation? That's a lot of questions in one.
Vice Mayor and Council, this project cash flow changed to allocate to $582,000 in FY22 and $209,740 in FY24, but the project total remained the same of $600,322, and the project reflects the share of the cost for this grant project.
So it was moved up because it's now become a grant project.
Correct.
Just want to understand what's going on here. Page 170, 67th Avenue bike lanes, which are not part of the GO funding we're talking about today. It was originally approved fiscal year 22, 430,000 plus. Fiscal year 2023, 430,000 plus, and fiscal year 2024, 361,000 plus. That has been all rearranged. And now the allocation has doubled for fiscal year 2022. It's gone from 430,000 to 755,000. So I would like to know why the allocation doubled, why it was moved up into 2022 when it had been, well, it wasn't moved up, but there's been an additional allocation for 2023 that was not in the approved CIP from last year. Answers.
Vice Mayor and Council, excuse me. The project cash flow changed to allocate $755,788 in FY22 and $466,864 in FY24. The project total remained at $1.2 million. This project reflects the share of the cost for this grant project.
So again, it's another grant project that forces it to move up and to double the amount. Page 171, street reconstruction, Glendale, 101 to 91st. In the prior CIP, there was no funding for 2023. Now we have added an additional $395,332. Why?
Vice Mayor and Council, the project funding source changed from transportation sales tax to general obligation bonds.
Okay. We have a couple of pages that are blank. Aren't you lucky? Hard to turn these pages. Page 178. Street reconstruction of 83rd Avenue, Glendale to Northern. I note that for fiscal year 2022, there is 200,000 allocated, and I assume that's for design of the street reconstruction. But the actual request to do the work does not occur until fiscal year 2025. And it's in the amount of $3,368,078. If there's any project in my district that cries for being done now, it is this one. If any of you have driven Glendale Avenue or 83rd Avenue between Glendale and Northern, it is a god-awful street. I would, with council consensus, hopefully move this would be a project, and I would like to see how it would affect the budget. Move up the actual work to 2023 after design is complete.
Mayor,
So-
members of the council, I think if you'll give us just a moment, Ms. Camacho can show you the impact of that.
Okay.
It's probably one of the better examples. The earliest, I believe the earliest that you would be able to do that project would be 2023, and the reason is you'll need voter authorization because you're already running out of voter authorization as we showed earlier. So she's going to show you, if you move it forward, what impact that has, if you'll bear with us for a moment.
Sure.
Vice Mayor, Councilmember Clark, members of the council. So I did move forward the project to fiscal year 2023. We've said yes, so it's now highlighted. I'll just scroll down to the bottom. You can see that for 23, streets have sufficient voter authorization, and it's also within the capacity to issue the debt with the levy flat. So we could move this project forward. It's within voter authorization and the capacity to issue debt.
I would ask council to consider that when we get to final approval of various projects, that you consider joining me in moving that project up.
Vice Mayor. Right here, sir. Thank you. Yeah, with the mask, you can't see lips moving. Yeah, I would concur with that. Orangewood, or not Orangewood, but 83rd Avenue, that roadway between Glendale Avenue and Northern is as bad now as 71st Avenue was between Orangewood and Glendale Avenue. I would say no, don't move it up right now, but I concur it needs to be. And here's why. Most of the development down 83rd Avenue is completed, for the exception of one small lot that I see dirt being moved, so it's probably going to be the last one. There might be some improvements that that builder can provide, but that's it. It's 83rd Avenue between Northern and Glendale is done. There's no more development there, so now would be the time to move that up, and that would be the appropriate time. So I could support that.
Thank
It's
you.
a bad road.
Vice Mayor.
Go ahead, and I want Councilmember Tomachoff.
Okay, Vice Mayor, sorry. I'm going to ask Ms. Camacho to scroll back up for a minute. So if you notice, the answer to the question, we highlighted that row by answering yes and saying we would do that project. However, if you scroll back over, Ms. Camacho, can we not see it or make it a little bit smaller? That assumes that we don't do these other projects that were that council previously had identified. They're on slide 16, I believe. So those are all still no's. So if you go,
Well, I don't understand, because at the bottom of that slide, you indicate that there is capacity left. That's what Ms. Camacho said.
yes,
So why does it automatically generate a no for other projects?
Mayor, members of the council, again, let me just walk you through this just really quickly. And so if you see, under this scenario, Glendale Avenue, 101 to 91 is still a no. Cactus, 51st to 58th, or I'm sorry, I can't read that, but that's a no. So as long as all of those projects above it are a no, yes, you can move that project forward. But if if you start saying yes to those other projects, which had been identified previously, that's why they're kind of listed in this order, then you'll see red. So as long as we don't do the ones in between the pieces of yellow, then you'll be okay. But if you start saying yes to other projects, it will prevent you from doing that particular project that you asked for.
I didn't even understand what you said. Say it again.
Okay, let's just do it. Lisette, will you, so as soon as you say yes to that project,
To that which?
Glendale Avenue, 101 to 91st.
Okay.
Now you're seeing that you cannot do both. You have to take something off that you had already given direction to staff to fund back in June. So
So
those,
you have to take money away from the yellow projects,
you have to,
because that's presumably what will be moving forward in the coming year.
Mayor, members of the council, you don't have to take funding away from, Lisette, undo the yes on that one. You don't have to take funding away from those that are in yellow right there, but you have to take funding from any of the other ones
The
that
white
say
ones
no.
below it.
Correct.
Okay. But if I were to say to the streets department, to Mr. Eversole, is there a project in white that perhaps could be put off in favor of doing that 83rd Avenue Glendale to Northern project? What would, that's off the top of your head. I'm not asking you for a definitive, but could it be done?
Vice Mayor, I'd like to actually jump in there if I could, Councilmember Clark. The answer is yes, with a caveat. The 3 projects you see here in yellow have already been approved by the council, which means we're already well underway with design and engineering and coordination of utility, all the things that go as part of a project. So you could swap some things out, but the project that you're interested in, we'd have to start over, or start, not over, but begin to do engineering, and there's going to be a delay there. So the answer is yes, but staff's been working on the design and engineering and procurement, all the things that go with the construction project, because it had been prior approved by the council. But it doesn't mean you can't reprioritize projects.
Well, that's what I'm trying to get to. You don't mess with the yellow projects because they're already underway in some shape
That's
or
correct.
fashion. But you can mess with the white projects underneath the yellow projects.
That's correct.
Okay. And then I would say to staff, is there a way to accommodate the 83rd Avenue project by doing something with one of the white projects?
Jackie, do you want to talk? Chime in?
If I could interject, I think with reference to projects we can and cannot do with reference to current authorization, I think that's the real issue here. Do we have voter authorization? If we don't, then we can't go past that point. And I would like to refer you just back to 2 slides in the presentation. One is slide 15, if we could, Lisette. 15, when we discussed with City Council in June about transferring $15 million in cash that was supposed to carry some of these projects to move it over to pavement management program to allow us to raise the amount of dollars for pavement management above 10 million every year and really get a jump start, catch up and keep up with that, with those type of treatments. These 3 were already in design and moving. That's 2.7 authorized by City Council in the CIP and already voted on. The next slide is what represents the $15 million that, well, except for the last 2, 83rd and 75th, and we did put that down is design, but most specifically, the rest of Glendale Avenue from 90, from the 101 to El Mirage, which is coming to City Council next week. Glendale 101 to 91st, 3.3 million is a project that we need. I think we've been told that we need to get that finished. It's in terrible shape, and we want to do it before Super Bowl. The third one, it's under design, and it's in the capital program for this year and next.
I understand that, but I thought Ms. Camacho said that even with the expenditure of the $17 million of already approved authorization, there was a balance of somewhere around $7 million of authorization left.
Mayor, members of the council.
But it isn't the authorization, it's the debt capacity, correct?
Mayor, members of the council, let's go back to the worksheet again. I think this is, so those projects that Mr. Friedline is alluding to, on this sheet, they say no. So if you turn them to yes, which is the direction that you had given back in June, but this is why we're having this discussion. But if we turn them to yes, then you will run out of capacity. Go ahead and just, those are the ones that were on that sheet.
So I'll run out of debt capacity, not authorization.
You'll run out of authorization.
I thought Ms. Camacho said that even with the expenditure of the 17 million, there was still 7 million left in authorization under streets. Was I wrong, or did I not hear that correctly? It wasn't this slide, it was a previous slide where you showed that there was 7 million left in streets authorization. I'm not talking about debt capacity right now.
Mayor, members of the council, Councilmember Clark, the 17 million you're referring to is, I'll just go back to this slide right here. So it's this 2.7 million and also this 15 million is about the 17 million that you're referring to. And yes, they are within existing voter authorization. The reason why we're showing it red now is because we accelerated this project to fiscal year 23. This
And there's no
3.3.
debt capacity.
And there's no debt capacity, and you see that's close to the 3 million that you accelerated in 23.
Okay, I'm going to let it go for now because I don't want this to drag on, but we'll discuss this further.
One more, Councilmember Tomachoff.
Thank you. With the new administration and with the, there's going to be some kinds of economic recovery plans, and realizing that our president was vice president during the recovery from the recession, would it be, and what I'm going to suggest is we find money for design for these projects. We do that part now, we fund that now, so that we have projects that are literally shovel-ready, because we don't know for sure. We never did get an infrastructure package with the last administration, but I think we should be ready and put as much money towards design now as we can, so that we can take advantage of any type of economic stimulus projects, shovel-ready projects that may be coming out with this administration, especially knowing that this is, the vice president was in charge of a lot of the stuff that they rolled out in the recovery of the recession. So the more ready we are for that type of thing, so whether we maybe actually put that project into actual gear to move it forward, but if we can find money to do design so we're ready to receive federal funding for any of these projects, I think that maybe that should be what we should be talking about right now today, is if we can find the money for some of these projects to do the design part so we're ready, that we should be thinking about doing that. Thank you.
If I can, Vice Mayor, when we showed you slide 16, the $15 million, and we showed 83rd and 75th, purposely designed only, but we don't have the authorization to go past it. But that is part and parcel of getting design on the shelf, ready to go if there's an infrastructure program. What we have within the existing authorization in today's, this year's fiscal year. And Don, I think Don can talk about some of the design for streets that we're doing right now as we speak, trying to get ready for an infrastructure bill. And if that's not the case, either studies or designs, they're $150,000 to $200,000, but we'll be ready even if we don't have an infrastructure bill. If we're lucky enough to get more authorization by the voters, they're on the shelf, ready to go. It'll take a minimal amount of time to update and get those to city council, get them out to bid, and get them constructed. But if I can, when we look at that slide and the 2 million, what that's basically saying is we have no more authorization left. Any other projects past that need to have some other funding source. And obviously, we keep talking about the potential of having another referendum and all the projects for the next 3 to 5 years, and then 6 to 10, depending on how we would frame that for the voters.
Vice Mayor,
Yes.
not quite done with me yet. I have two more questions. One has to do with page 210, infill lighting program. In the approved CIP from last year, there was absolutely no allocations from beyond 2021. Now I see that staff is recommending an allocation for every fiscal year. Mr. Eversole, can you explain what's happening here?
Vice Mayor and Council, this project reflects a request to add new allocation for the infill lighting program. We currently have approximately 100 locations that have identified gaps in the street lighting. So this is a program to fill those gaps.
Okay, and you decided it was a priority to go ahead and reinsert it this year and for the next 5 years?
Correct.
Okay. Over the next 5 years, how many of those 100 street lights will be inserted into the city at $150,000 a year? It's like $750,000 over 5 years.
Schedule.
Okay.
Ninety will be completed.
90? So we'll have 10 lonely little street light gaps that haven't been filled.
Theoretically, yes.
Which I have a suggestion for, but I'm not sure there's capacity anywhere along, so I'm not going to say anything right now. And then on but I have a question. In last year's CIP, there was project 219, street reconstruction, Camelback Road, 51st to 59th. It's been removed. Has it been removed because that project is finally completed?
Vice Mayor and Council members, that segment of Camelback Road has been identified to receive a lesser type of treatment than a reconstruction. So it's no longer in the arterial reconstruction program presently.
So where has it moved to? Does it have a new number?
So
Well,
Vice Mayor and members of the council, it's presently not in our 10-year CIP. So I don't know the specific date of which it'll receive a treatment. I'll have to come back to you with that.
Yes, I would very much like to know, because it just suddenly disappeared, and now I learned that you have no plans for it at all, and I think that's a very important road for the city that needs to be remediated if necessary. Vice Mayor, that ends my questions on streets.
Thank you. Ready to move on?
I'll turn over the presentation to Ms. Lindsay and to go over the flood control projects.
Okay, the flood control GEO-bond-funded CIP projects have been prioritized based on the Glendale Area Stormwater Management Plan, the Maryville Area Master Drainage Study, and also have been timed in conjunction with grant match funds from Maricopa County Flood Control District. The slide you see in front of you are programmed projects that are within the adopted CIP that fall within existing voter authority. The next slide that you see are projects that are within the adopted CIP but fall outside of existing voter authorization. And with that, we can answer specific projects about the flood control program. One thing I'd like to add is there's a slide for each one of these projects within the presentation. So if council has specific questions about that particular project, we can go to that slide so the department can answer questions.
Councilmember Tomacha?
So the binders, in the binders, it's drainage and not flood control?
Yes, that's correct. The flood control is the name of the category of the general obligation bond. We have it as drainage within the CIP.
Okay, well, that's what I thought, but I wasn't positive, so thank you.
Vice Mayor,
Anyone else? Yes.
I do have some questions.
Okay.
Page 25, Camelback Road, our favorite topic today, 51st to 58th. I would like to know the rationale why that project has been moved back three years. It was approved to start in fiscal year 2022. Now all the allocation is moved to fiscal year 2025. Why?
Vice Mayor, Councilmember Clark, I'm Don Besser with Engineering. There were several projects that we identified, about 6 in total, for the proposed bond program last fall. That did not pass, so the bulk of our bond program, or the bulk of our flood control program relies heavily on matching grants from the county, from McFlood. The 2 projects that are shown as proposed to be funded both have grants that have been approved by McFlood. The grants aren't showing on this because this is a general obligation bond presentation, but those 2 grants total about $7 million. The projects that are below that we do not have the remaining bonding capacity to do that. So to your specific question on that reach of Camelback Road, there's not enough bonding authority by itself to do that improvement, nor do we at this time have a matching grant for that. So there was 2 of those projects that got moved out. They're not off our radar, they're still in the plan, but it'll be time to find the funding.
So I assume the second project is 83rd Avenue, Bethany to Camelback, also did not receive grant funding.
At this time, that's correct,
Okay.
Council Member.
That's what I needed to know. Okay. Let me just check. That's it for me. Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay.
Vice Mayor, members of the council, did you want us to pull up the yellow sheet to look at any of these projects, or are you ready to move on?
Vice Mayor?
Yes.
Not necessarily to that question, but I actually would like to hear the description of what our plan is, that what the need is on Glendale Avenue from 91st to the 101. Is that in our material?
I think they're getting an answer.
Vice Mayor, Councilmember Turner, were you still referring to flood control perhaps on that reach of Glendale Avenue?
No,
Or were
sir,
you
I
talking
wasn't.
generically about the street itself?
I was thinking generically about the street itself. And
Okay, I'm going to let my colleague, Mr. Ebersol, come back up here. And I would also just take this moment to say, on the previous conversation about shovel-ready, we have about 6 miles of roads that we're now trying to prepare for that shovel-ready status.
thank you.
Vice Mayor and council members, Glendale Avenue between 91st Avenue and the 95th Avenue is going to be reconstructed. And that's scheduled to occur prior to the Super Bowl, February 23. So it's a full reconstruction.
So this is the section of Glendale Avenue that is between Westgate and Cabela's and the Cracker Barrel restaurant, that section right in there.
Yes.
It doesn't hardly seem to me off the top of my head that it's old enough that it would need a full reconstruction, and is this overkill?
Vice Mayor and council members, based on our analysis, no.
Vice Mayor, if I may,
You done,
Councilmember Turner.
Councilmember Turner?
I'd like to hear
Thank you,
Councilmembers
Councilman
in that area
Aldama.
that know it better, perhaps.
Thank you, Councilmember Turner. I'm not the expert, but one who frequents Glendale Avenue, because my son lives down by the furniture warehouse. That road, surprisingly and not surprisingly, kind of both because of the traffic, is in really bad shape. It's really coming apart. And if we don't get it now, it's going to be a full reconstruction. But Councilmember Turner, just my observation of driving that route very frequently, that road is in bad shape and it needs to be fixed. I brought this up last year from that intersection, 91st Avenue, all the way over to 67th Avenue is really bad, but that section is worthy of looking at to be resurfaced. Just wanted to give you that based on my observation. No expert, but just observation.
Vice Mayor, Councilmember Aldama, thank you. Resurface, I can understand, I can tell from the aerial photos and such that it does need some attention, but we're planning on doing a full reconstruction there, is that right, Mr. Ebersol?
Vice Mayor and council members, yes, we're going down to the sub-base level.
Okay. And that's because the PMI on that section warrants that treatment? Is that what we're looking at?
That's one of the factors that are associated with the decision for reconstruct.
Okay, all for now, but I may need further explanation and may revisit it in the future. Thank you.
Okay,
Vice Mayor?
yes.
If I may,
go on.
thank you, Vice Mayor. Mr. Ebersol, how much, so you just answered yes to Councilmember Turner with regard to the PMI, but how much of what you're proposing is considering how much traffic is going to increase or the load on that road? So can you, in percentage, if you will, how much of what you want to do is with regard to the future use of that road so that we're not back doing it again?
Vice Mayor and council members, we're anticipating a large amount of growth there. I don't remember the average daily traffic volumes off the top of my head, but right now it's around 30,000 vehicles per day usage. And with the developments that are coming into the area, that traffic is going to get a lot more congested, emphasizing the need for the the reconstruction of it.
Thank you, Vice Mayor, if I may continue. And that's a corridor for many of the sanitation trucks that are coming from East Glendale, if there's such a term, down into the landfill. Is that correct?
Yes.
Quite a
Vice
bit
Mayor
of
and
traffic.
Councilmember, yes, they do use that corridor.
Yeah, I'm just advocating that I know we're gonna have so much growth there that road should be done now, not later. Again, just my observations. Thank you.
Okay. Councilmember Thomas.
Thank you, sorry about that. This is the first I've heard of doing road reconstruction in anticipation of growth. I haven't, at least, I don't recall us ever having that conversation before. And if it's in anticipation of due to growth, wouldn't there be DIF money available for some of this and not have to use bonding capacity? Or not all bond, can you use some combination of funding for that?
Vice Mayor and council members, this isn't a capacity increase. It's not a capacity enhancement. So it's not an expansion of the roadway. It's a replace in kind.
No, I meant because of the anticipation of the growth, the increased traffic on that. That's what you just said, that there's a lot of growth. There's going to be, the car count's going to go up. And in anticipation of that's part of the reason for the road needing reconstruction. That's what I'm saying, is I don't recall us saying, because we anticipate higher traffic volumes, we're going to do the reconstruction rather than a mill and overlay or some other treatment.
And you're correct. It's not the factor for how we decide on doing a reconstruct. It's just one of the components that we use for our decision.
Okay, because I mean, I won't use another street for an example. Then my second question was, Vice Mayor, if I could, about other funding sources other than general obligation bonds for this. DIF fees, if it's due to growth, isn't there any DIF money available to fund at least some of this?
Vice Mayor and council members, I don't think this would be qualified for, I'll look into it, work with finance on it, but I don't think this is going to qualify for development impact fees related, because we're not expanding the roadway to accommodate additional lanes.
Mr. Vice Mayor? So this is kind of the challenge of DIF fees. Even though it's been increased volume may lead to an increased deterioration of the road. If we are widening Glendale Avenue because of the growth of capacity, going from a 313 lane configuration to a 414, for example, that additional lane would be eligible. But just because of increased growth has essentially deteriorated the road quicker, it doesn't make it eligible for the DIF fees. If I could go back to Councilmember Turner's question about it. So one of the things that why we've targeted the 22-23 is Zanjero Pass area on the north side of Glendale Avenue is now fully under construction if you've been there. So over the last couple of years, between developments that Westgate is putting in on the very north end of their property and what's happening on the south end of Zanjero, we've had a number of intrusions into the street, cutting into it. We've got a sewer water project that's going to be coordinated along with that as well. So that's why that project has been identified as a reconstruct, and with the timing, we're actually coordinating, and we believe most of the construction that's happening in that area will have been in place prior to this project starting.
With that, we'll move into the library general obligation bond funded CIP projects. Again, these have been prioritized based on previous instruction from council or previous feedback from council, as well as staff is currently reviewing some draft assessments of the libraries. The first slide that you see in front of you are approved projects within the adopted capital improvement program that fall within existing voter authority for libraries. And the following slide are program projects that are actually within the adopted CIP, but that require additional voter authorization.
Vice Mayor?
Yes, Councilmember Clark.
With reference to the slide, program projects requiring additional voter authorization. I would like to consider adding Heroes Library expansion to that list for additional voter authorization. And the reason for my doing so is that bond authorization would be required to complete all of Heroes Park, including, we had talked about the rec space having additional community meeting space. That is scheduled for at least 10 years out. And Heroes needs additional capacity right now. So if Heroes Library expansion were added to projects requiring additional voter authorization, it is my hope that we could get some kind of an expansion prior to waiting another 10 years. And so I would respectfully ask that we include, when we seek voter authorization for additional projects, that we add Heroes Library expansion to that list.
Also, I see we're talking Velma Teague. We're looking to do some modernization to the amphitheater, maybe other parts of City Hall. So maybe we should keep that in mind. Anything with Velma Teague might be put off for later years.
And then, Vice Mayor,
Yes.
I have a specific question related to page 79, Foothills Library renovation. And I just want to understand what's going on here. In the approved CIP from last year, there was $866,000 approved for expenditure in fiscal year 2024. I would like to know, under the proposed CIP, there is additional funding sought for fiscal year 2022 in the amount of $225,000, and additional funding sought for fiscal year 2026 in the amount of $1.3 million. And I would like to understand why those two new allocations were added.
Vice Mayor, Councilmember Clark, I'm going to turn that question over to Ms. Witenko.
Vice Mayor, council members, could you actually go to slide 33 for me, Amy? We actually have slides on the specific projects, so if we go to, Amy, can you go to slide 33? In the description for the project, we have draft facility condition assessments for this building, like we presented with the public safety, and as part of that, we noticed the chiller, and so we sent staff up to do some investigation. So the funding in FY22 would allow for a replacement of that chiller. Then we've decreased the funding in FY24 to account for the design, but pull the chiller out of that. And then in the other years, we've just spread it out. We've been working closely with engineering on what's a reasonable amount that we can construct in a year. And so you'll see that the funding's actually gone down by about $275,000 overall, but we've just put it in the years where we think it's appropriate. And this is our recommendation to council.
Makes perfect sense. I just wanted to understand what was happening. Thank you.
Councilmember Tomchak?
Thank you. Yeah, I'm not sure I understand the reduced amount for fiscal year 2024. Just, can you explain that again?
Sure, Vice Mayor and council members. In fiscal year 24, we previously had $866,000, I believe, and we reduced that. We knew we had to do some chiller work, so we actually pulled the chiller amount forward, so that it went down by $225,000 to account for that. And then we looked at what it's currently costing us to design per square foot, and we altered that number to kind of fit what it would be if we went into design today. So that's to cover design of the library renovation for the remaining components that have to be designed.
Thank you.
Okay, if there are no more questions about the library GO bonds, we'll move into public safety. The public safety program and staff recommendations for the prioritization and timing of the projects within this category are based upon recommendations from the the public safety building condition assessment, as well as previous council instruction. What you see on the first slide here are programmed projects within the adopted CIP that fall within existing voter authority. So there's $56,170,303. And these are new projects within the CIP for this year that also fall within existing voter authorization. There's approximately $98 million of voter authorization in the public safety category. So these new projects fall within existing voter authorization but require council approval.
Vice Mayor,
Yes.
I would suggest the addition again of a possible program, and I know it needs to be fleshed out, but I know that the police department is in the initial stages of working on a drone program. And I think that could be invaluable in years to come. So I would like to see if there is capacity, debt capacity. I know there's authorization, but if there is debt capacity to add to that 3-place list a future drone program for the police department. Yeah, I don't know if they can develop a dollar amount as a placeholder, but I would like to see that considered.
Vice Mayor, Councilmember Clark, if you could turn to page 139 in your binder under the public safety program, there's a project called Unmanned Aerial Vehicles. This would be a drone program that is currently within the DIF funding for police. It's also a new project this year that we'll discuss when we bring the DIF projects before you.
I don't know how I missed it, but I missed it. Thank you. Never mind.
Vice Mayor?
Yes, Councilmember Aldama.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. With regard to all stations, actually, I'm just going to pick on this one here because it's got HVAC replacement. Not to get into too much detail, but is the recommendation to replace simply the HVAC systems that are in that building, or are we considering replacing them and creating more ventilation for those buildings with regard to decontaminating the building the firefighters are in?
Vice Mayor, Councilmember Aldama, I'm going to turn that question over to Ms. Watenko.
Thank you.
Vice Mayor, Councilmember Aldama, we have not yet started programming or design, but I know within the existing fire stations, a current project this year is to look at increased ventilation, specifically in the bays. And the preliminary conversations have been that we need to include these things. We're currently working with engineering in the fire department on visiting other fire stations in the valley to find out what state of the art is and what the benefits might be from doing things like that. So several of these projects are just kind of a remodel like we did at Fire Station 152, and others are a demolition, but we are looking at the ventilation with the HVAC systems.
Vice Mayor, if I may continue. Ms. Montenko, thank you so much. I see $335,000. That just seems like we're replacing it. But so thank you for that. And now would be the time to start addressing, partitioning the building from, and you're more of an expert than I am, from the garage and the building that they live in, the living quarters. But also, we really have to focus on decontaminating that building by more ventilation. I hope that would come in the project, and this dollar amount would keep us from doing that.
Can you go to page 49? So, Vice Mayor and Councilmember Aldama, we have specific projects on the fire stations, and we're looking at them currently. But on page 49 of this presentation, you'll see exactly what we're proposing with this $335,000. We have Fire Station 151, which is not in the 10 years of the CIP, but we're looking at how do we update that HVAC system. We're looking at Fire Station 159, which is I believe in the out years, and it may not even be in the CIP just yet, and as well as the Advocacy Center. So these are projects where we don't have other projects programmed at these stations, or don't have them programmed soon enough.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Thank you so much. And then I would just ask that, and I'm sure you're going to do this, get your firefighters involved and make sure they're meeting with you on their needs and ventilation. And this whole entire council wants to make sure our firefighters are safe, our police as well. But in this case, there's contamination we have to eliminate. And sounds like you're on that route, but I just want to make a reminder that let's not forget that part of the projects. Thank you. Thank you, Vice Mayor.
Were there any other specific questions on public safety? Okay, so with that, this is the budget calendar again to remind you when our next budget workshop is. It's on February 16th, and at that time we'll be discussing the general obligation bond-funded CIP prioritization of parks, open space, cultural facilities, and general government bonds.
One moment, Council Tomachoff.
Yeah, I have a question, or actually a request with regard to the budget calendar. I know you sent out a memo with, a punch list dates, but rather than trying to keep track of the dates in this email, could it be just incorporated into the spreadsheet on the budget list, like what date we're going to be receiving the updated CIP materials, and what date we'll be receiving the operating budget materials, so that we can know without having to try to figure out who sent me the email, when did I get it, and try to find those dates. It's just a lot to keep track of. With regard to that, on the updated CIP materials, the email says that it will be provided by March 12th in advance of the March 16th workshop, and I looked, March 12th is a Friday. And I'm asking that we do not receive it at 5 o'clock or 4 o'clock on a Friday for a Tuesday morning workshop. It's a lot to go through. I don't think it's fair to give it to us on a Friday afternoon at 5 o'clock and expect us to be fully prepared by Tuesday morning. So I'm asking for a revision there to get that to us sooner, at least even by Thursday afternoon, so we have another full day. This is a lot. I mean, you guys work in this stuff every day. We get it and have to try to figure out, I mean, sometimes I feel like I should be a private detective to try to figure out what's changed, where things went. So it's a lot for us to take in, especially over a weekend. There's really nobody to call if we have questions. So, but the March 12th to March 16th, for me anyway, is not satisfactory. Thank you.
Vice Mayor.
Yes.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. We spoke earlier, had a robust conversation about having a robust conversation on reduction in sales tax and food tax. Is this the appropriate time, or did staff, Mr. City Manager, is that enough direction from the council to bring that back?
Mr. Vice Mayor, members of the council, Councilmember Aldama, yeah, we'll huddle up after this and go through all the different questions and stuff, and that'll be one we'll look for an appropriate time in the very near future of bringing that back and getting it calendared for discussion.
Okay, so we don't need a formal item of interest. The council gave enough guidance.
I believe we certainly heard there's enough interest from the council to move forward.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Vice Mayor.
Vice Mayor, I had one other question, and this is budget related. It's actually secondary property tax related, but at the January 12th workshop and the five-year financial forecast, I specifically asked if there was a dollar amount the tax had increased, the secondary property tax based on new properties coming on, increased property values, and someone was going to get back to me with that amount, and I did not get it. Thank you.
Vice Mayor, Councilmember Tolmachoff, members of the council, we can certainly get that to you.
Vice Mayor?
Yes.
I would just like to make a comment about our budget workshops. The budget is the most critical item, as far as I'm concerned, for the city all year long. Budget and finance staff deals with it every day. You know the ins and outs of this budget. You know what's happening and what's not happening within the budget. Various departments seek your advice and counsel on a daily basis. Once a year, council gets to review the budget. And again, this is the most important task that perhaps we do in any calendar or fiscal year. Providing us more information is never a bad thing. Do not assume that because you know it, we know it. I would like to see you err on the side of providing us an overabundance of information on doing some of the things that were suggested, like with regard to capacity estimates was one example. Getting the material to us as quickly as possible. And what kind of perturbs me just a little bit is that each year we're going to enter this exercise. Why you should be hurrying to get these books to us on a Friday afternoon, I have no idea. There's a lot of formatting that is standard from year to year that requires a plug-in of numbers only. And even if they are estimates and they're off by $20, that doesn't matter. What matters is that we get the information with estimates, and you can asterisk anything as an estimate to be revised as we march through the budget process. But please don't be afraid to give us an overabundance of information. That's what these workshops are designed for, is to educate the council, and you're also educating the general public, but primarily the council, on what a proposed budget is for this year. So with that, thank you for your time and effort. It is appreciated tremendously, I know, by this council. But it just seems like every year we have generally the same conversations. And at some point, we hope you'll get it. Thank you. Thank you, Vice Mayor.
Welcome. City Manager?
Mr. Vice Mayor, a couple closing comments, and certainly no disrespect to Councilmember Clark. Staff's worked really hard actually to try to get you more information. If you recall, as I said at the beginning of this workshop, we didn't even introduce the CIP as part of our budgeting process until mid-March. And so part of our goal was to get this conversation going and getting into that rhythm and getting you as much information. It isn't really plug and play as much as it might seem like. But so the creation of the online tool or the electronic spreadsheet is something that we had to develop kind of from scratch. We are going to look to see whether there are CIP software applications that perhaps will make this a little bit easier and more timely. But we heard you loud and clear, and that's why we're having on February 2nd our first of a number of capital workshops. We've quadrupled the number of capital workshop all half-day hearings because we want the council to feel like they can get into the rhythm and really understand what's there. Now, to that degree, what I would recommend is this spreadsheet. Staff knows it really well, and maybe it might be really helpful is to feel free to schedule a meeting with Lizette and Amy and her team, and they can actually pull this sheet up for you and kind of walk you through it. And I think maybe just an investment of even a half hour, an hour, I think they can kind of explain it to you one-on-one, I think would be a real good exercise, because then I think once you get familiar with it, you'll be able to really zip through this and see the implications of the change. But that is our goal, is to invest a lot more time and energy in getting you information regarding the CIP. Today was just the first step of that, and we'll work. Certainly we understand the desire not to wait till Friday to get information, so we'll work on an advanced schedule on that, and we'll commit to, we'll kind of talk about what it will take to produce that, and then we'll communicate to the council what our commitment is to getting you that information. But I do encourage you to reach out to our team on the yellow sheet spreadsheet, because I think it's really a good tool that you can, and once you get kind of get familiar with it, I think it's going to be something you haven't had in the past to help you make your decisions as you move forward. So thank you for your investment of time, and we've got a whole series of notes that we've taken, and we'll be getting back with responses in all those areas.
Thank you.
Finally, lunch will be here shortly, and so, certainly we can continue the conversation during lunch if you have additional questions.
Any other comments,
Vice
council?
Mayor. Vice Mayor.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you, Vice Mayor. I just got a couple comments. I know some of our council members, and rightfully so, were critical on the process, and they have the right to do that, and I support the right to do that. I do, however, want to thank our staff for not being complacent and bringing upon change on our process for our budget. I've always said we got to change what we're doing. So I want to thank you for pushing the envelope, challenging the process, bringing us a different way of doing things in business. I think the issue here today was just putting the carriage in front of the horse. But I recognize the change and the reason to do things different. I think that interactive spreadsheet will be challenging, but it's a welcoming change for me, and I just want to thank staff for bringing something different. It's just I think the issue was putting the carriage in front of the horse. But with that said, thank you for bringing something different and not being complacent. Thank you, Vice Mayor.
Welcome. Anyone else?
I have one.
Okay,
just-
Councilmember
I'm sorry.
Tomachoff.
Are you going to be sending us a link, or how are we going to be getting this? Or do we have to log in to use this, or how is that? You said we're going to be able to play with it and use it, but how are we going to be getting access to this,
Mayor, members of
editable
the council.
spreadsheet?
We'll be sending it to you via an email, so you could save it on your drive or anywhere you want to save it. And any changes that you have, you can send it back to us, and then we can try to incorporate all the changes from all the council members. And then
So-
we'll bring it back forward for discussion in future council workshops.
Okay, so but Vice Mayor, so you're going to send it, we're going to have to download it onto, like, I use my personal device, my own laptop. I'll have to put it on my laptop, or I'm not sure what you,
Vice Mayor, members, it'll show up as an Excel spreadsheet, so you're already, if you're office compliant on your computer, which I believe you are, all you have to do is you'll just double click on the Excel spreadsheet and it will populate and pull up.
okay, all right, thank you.
Anyone else? No further business for the council. This meeting's adjourned.